I still remember that evening like it happened yesterday. The house was quiet, too quiet. There was a cup of tea on the table, still warm, but untouched. And the door was slightly open, swinging with the wind. That was the night my husband left me. He didn't shout, he didn't argue, he just left. For a long time, I believed he'd come back. I'd wake up to the sound of footsteps and tell myself, that's him, he's home. But it was always the wind, just the wind. It's strange how silence can become louder than words. For days, I walked around the house picking up his things, touching his shirts, trying to feel his presence. His jacket still hung near the door. His slippers still sat beside the bed. It felt wrong to move them. People say time heals everything, but I think time only teaches you how to live with an open wound. When I first met Armand, he wasn't the kind of man who made promises. He didn't bring flowers or whisper grand words of love. He was simple, quiet, steady, the kind of man who smiled more with his eyes than his lips. We met in the most ordinary way, through family friends at a wedding. He sat at the far end of the table, hardly speaking, but when he finally looked at me, I noticed something gentle in his eyes. Not excitement, not flirtation, just peace. That night, when everyone was busy talking, he poured me water without asking. It sounds like nothing, doesn't it? But to me, that small act said everything. It said, I see you. After our families met and agreed, we got married quietly. No big celebration, no show. Just a simple ceremony under soft yellow lights with prayers and laughter. I still remember the first night in our home. We didn't have much. 2 rooms, a small kitchen, and an old wooden chair that creaked whenever someone sat on it. But it felt like heaven to me. He wasn't talkative, but he'd always ask, did you eat? And sometimes that question was all the love I needed. It started slowly. One evening, he came home late. Then another. At first, I didn't think much of it. Business was growing, his father was aging, there were responsibilities. But then he stopped smiling as much, stopped asking if I'd eaten. His eyes, those kind eyes, began to look distant, distracted. I tried to talk to him. Armand, you look tired. Is something wrong? He'd just shake his head and say, no, everything's fine. But I knew it wasn't. Something was changing and I couldn't stop it. One night, as I waited for him at dinner, I heard his parents' voices in the next room. They didn't know I was listening. His mother said, she's not from our background. You could have married someone who brought respect to this house. And his father added, she's a good girl, but she doesn't fit. People talk. My heart sank. I had always tried to please them, cooking their favorite meals, caring for them when they were ill, smiling even when they didn't smile back. But still, I wasn't enough. When Armand entered the room, his father said quietly, you'll have to choose what's best for the family. I'll never forget the look in his eyes that night. He didn't argue. He didn't defend me. He just lowered his head in silence. The next few weeks were cold, quiet. He became a stranger in his own home. He'd come in late, leave early. Sometimes I'd wake up and find him sitting outside, staring into the dark. I wanted to ask him what was wrong, but I was afraid of the answer. Then one evening, I came home from the market and saw him sitting by the door with a small suitcase beside him. His hands were trembling. He looked at me and said softly, "I'm sorry." That was all. No explanation, no fight, no reason. I ran after him, calling his name, but he didn't look back. The street swallowed him. That night, I sat on the floor and cried until morning. Every sound, every creak, every shadow felt like him coming back, but he never did. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and I kept waiting. At first, I told everyone he was away for work. Then I stopped talking about him altogether. People whispered. Some pitied me, some judged me. But what hurt the most was not knowing why. Why he left. Why he didn't even say goodbye. Why love, something that once felt so safe, could disappear without a sound. And then, years later, I saw him again. He looked older, thinner. But when our eyes met, I knew I still loved him. That day, I finally asked him, "Why did you leave?" And the answer he gave me broke me. The days that followed felt endless. I'd wake up every morning expecting to hear the sound of his slippers on the floor, but there was only silence. I stopped opening the curtains. I didn't want the sunlight to remind me that the world was still moving while I stood still. Neighbors came by at first, bringing food, whispering words of comfort that didn't reach me. "You're strong," they said. "He'll come back." But strength isn't a choice. It's what's left when there's nothing else. I remember one morning sitting by the window, watching the postman walk by. I hoped, foolishly, that he'd bring me a letter. But he never did. Armand was gone. Completely gone. I told myself he must have his reasons. Maybe something happened. Maybe he was hurt. Maybe he needed space. But the longer I waited, the harder it became to believe any of those maybes. And slowly, the waiting became my life. I learned to live with half a heart. I cooked smaller meals. I talked less. The walls started to echo differently, not with laughter, but with the weight of absence. Sometimes I'd find myself talking to him as if he were still there. "I made your favorite tea today," I'd whisper, setting a cup down at his place. Then I'd stare at the steam and pretend he might walk in any minute. But he never did. Months later, his parents moved away. They didn't tell me where. I never asked. Somewhere deep down, I blamed them, but I didn't hate them. Hate takes too much energy, and I barely had enough to breathe. Time, I realized, doesn't heal. It only layers distance over pain. 3 years passed, and then 5. I found work at a local tailor shop. I stitched dresses for brides. hemming their dreams with my quiet hands. I smiled when they talked about love, the kind of love I once believed would never leave. People would ask, "Do you live alone?" And I'd smile and say yes, but it's peaceful. Peaceful was easier than saying empty. There were nights when the loneliness became too loud. I'd hold his photograph, the one from our first anniversary, and trace his face with my fingers. His eyes looked the same as they did when he first said he loved me. But love isn't always enough, is it? One afternoon, while cleaning the cupboard, I found a small brown envelope. It was addressed to Armand, from his uncle who lived in another city. Out of curiosity, I opened it. Inside was a short note. "We've spoken to your father. Do what you must. You're not wrong for choosing peace." The words confused me. Choosing peace? Peace from what? From me? From us? That night, I couldn't sleep. I replayed every moment we'd ever shared, trying to find the clue I'd missed. Did I push him away somehow? Was there something I didn't see? Or was I simply not enough to fight for? Eventually, I stopped asking those questions aloud. I still thought them, of course. They never go away. But I learned to live around them. I joined a women's sewing circle at the community center. At first, I went just to keep busy, but slowly I found something there, a sense of belonging. There was laughter, chatter, the hum of sewing machines, and the warmth of shared silence between women who understood pain without words. Some were widows, some divorced, some abandoned. Each had her own story, her own ache. It comforted me to realize I wasn't alone in my loneliness. One day, nearly 10 years after he left, a new neighbor moved into the house across the street. He was kind, soft-spoken, maybe in his late 40s. We'd exchange polite smiles now and then. But one afternoon, as we talked about the weather, he said, "I used to work in the same town your husband's family was from." My heart skipped. I hadn't heard that name, that place, in years. I asked, trying to sound calm, "Do you know the Rahim family?" He nodded. "Of course. Their son, Armin, used to run a small business before he moved away." "Moved away?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Yes," he said. "He's been in Hyderabad for years now. I heard he runs a repair shop there. Good man, quiet type." For a moment, everything around me blurred. The wind, the sounds, his voice, all faded. Armin was alive. He wasn't gone. He'd just built a new life somewhere else. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the floor with my old photo album, turning pages slowly, as if each memory were fragile glass. And then I made a decision, one I had been too afraid to make for a decade. I would go find him. Not to beg, not to blame, just to ask, why? Why did you leave without a word? Why didn't you look back? Why did you let me spend years wondering what I did wrong? The next morning, I packed a small bag, told my neighbor I was visiting a cousin, and boarded a bus. The ride was long and bumpy, the kind that makes you question every choice you've ever made. But my heart was steady. For the first time in years, I felt like I was moving toward something, even if it was just closure. When I reached Hyderabad, the streets buzzed with life. Vendors shouted, children laughed. The air smelled of fried food and diesel. I walked through narrow lanes until I found a small sign, Arman and Sons Repair Shop. My breath caught. He had sons. For a moment, I almost turned around, but my feet kept moving. Inside, the shop was modest. Tools on the wall, oil-stained counters, and the faint sounds of an old radio playing love songs. And then I saw him. He was standing at the back, fixing a watch, his hair grayer, his hands rougher, but it was him, my Arman. I didn't know what to say. For years, I'd imagined this moment, how I'd cry, how I'd shout, how I'd demand answers. But all I could whisper was, Arman. He froze. The screwdriver slipped from his hand and hit the floor. Then he turned, slowly. His eyes widened, filling with something between guilt and disbelief. He opened his mouth, but no words came. Finally, he said softly, "You shouldn't have come." For a long moment, neither of us moved. The sound of the ticking clocks on the wall filled the air. "I waited," I said, my voice trembling. "For years, you never came back." He looked down. "I know." "Why?" I asked. "Why did you leave me?" He sighed and gestured for me to sit. We sat across from each other, like strangers. He said, "I thought you built a better life. I didn't want to disturb it." I shook my head. "You didn't even ask." He rubbed his temples. "It wasn't that simple." "Then tell me," I said. "Please. After all these years, I deserve the truth." He looked at me for a long time, as if searching for the right words. And finally, he said, "I left because I was told to." "You were told to?" I whispered. He nodded. "By my father. He said if I stayed with you, he'd lose everything. The business, the respect, the family name. He told me you'd be better off without me." I felt my chest tighten. "And you believed him?" "I didn't want to," he said quietly. "But he was sick, and I thought, maybe he was right. You deserved more than a man torn between love and duty." Tears filled my eyes. "So, you left to please them?" He looked at me again. his eyes wet. He said, "I thought I was doing the right thing," he said, "but not a single day passed when I didn't think of you." For a long time, I said nothing. Because sometimes silence says everything words cannot. That night, I went back to my small hotel room and cried. Not out of anger, not even sorrow, but because I finally had the answer I'd been waiting for. It didn't fix the past. It didn't bring back what was lost, but it gave me something I hadn't felt in years: peace. When the sun rose the next morning, I was still awake. The sound of the ceiling fan hummed above me as I stared at the ceiling, my thoughts spinning faster than the blades. I'd imagined that when I finally met him, I'd feel relief, but instead, I felt emptiness, a hollow ache that even truth couldn't fill. He left because he was told to, not because he stopped loving me, not because he found someone else, but because of duty, because of pressure, because of family. And that almost hurt more. Because how do you hate someone who broke you out of love? The next day, I went back to his shop. I told myself it was for closure, but deep down, I knew it was for one more glimpse of him. When I entered, he looked up immediately, as if he'd been expecting me. There was hesitation in his smile, a quiet guilt that lingered behind his eyes. "You came back," he said softly. I nodded. I had more to ask. He motioned to a chair and I sat. "Did your family make you stay away all these years?" I asked. He sighed. "After I left, I thought I'd come back once things settled, but then father fell ill. I spent months taking care of him. When he passed, I wanted to reach out, but by then, I didn't know if you'd even want to hear from me." "You could have written," I said. He whispered. "I did, twice, but your letters were returned. Your old address, you'd moved." I froze. I remembered moving after his parents left town. Maybe that's why I never received anything. "So you thought I forgot you?" I said quietly. He looked down. "And you thought I abandoned you." The air between us grew heavy, full of years that neither of us could reclaim. He poured me tea in a small glass cup, the kind he always used at home. For a moment, the smell of chai brought back everything: our mornings, our laughter, our kitchen, the way he'd reach for my cup when he thought mine had more sugar. "How long have you been here?" I asked. 10 years, he said. "After father passed, I needed to start fresh. I built this place from scratch. It's not much, but it's honest work." "And your sons?" I asked, glancing at the shop sign again. He smiled faintly. "Not my sons, my apprentices, the boys I trained. They call me Baba, out of habit. Maybe it filled the silence for me too." There was something heartbreakingly tender about that. The idea that he had no children, but still found a way to give love. "You never remarried?" I asked. He shook his head. "No, I couldn't." I swallowed hard. "Why not?" He looked at me, really looked at me, and said, "Because no one else was you." His words cut through me like sunlight through old glass, gentle but blinding. All these years I'd lived thinking he moved on. I'd told myself stories just to survive. But the truth was worse and kinder at the same time. He had loved me in silence, and I had loved him in waiting. Two people, both in love, both alone. I took a deep breath. Do you ever regret leaving? He hesitated. Every single day. But at the time, I thought it was the only way. My father threatened to disown me. He said I'd lose everything if I stayed with you. And what did you lose instead? He looked around at the tiny shop. Peace. You. My home. I closed my eyes, tears slipping down my cheeks. He didn't reach out to wipe them like he once used to. Maybe he didn't think he had the right anymore. After a long silence, he spoke again, voice trembling. I need to tell you something else. Something I should have said a long time ago. I looked at him, waiting. The night I left, he said, my father gave me a choice. If I didn't walk away from you, he would have my younger brother cut off from work, from school, from everything. He said it was for the family's name. I gasped softly. So you left? For your brother? He nodded. I thought I could take the pain better than he could. He was young, still building his life. I didn't want him to suffer because of my choices. A silence hung between us. A silence so deep that it almost spoke for us. I finally whispered, and did it work? Did your sacrifice help? He smiled faintly. He has a good life now. Married, children, stability. He doesn't even know what I gave up for him. Maybe that's how it should be. I felt my heart ache in a way I couldn't describe. An ache that was both sorrow and admiration. I finally whispered, and did it work? Did your sacrifice help? He smiled faintly. He has a good life now. Married, children, stability. He doesn't even know what I gave up for him. Maybe that's how it should be. I felt my heart ache in a way I couldn't describe. An ache that was both sorrow and admiration. I could have told you, I said softly. We could have faced it together. He looked down. I was afraid you'd ask me to stay, and I knew, if you did, I wouldn't be able to leave. After that conversation, we didn't say much more. He walked me back to my hotel, just like he used to walk me home years ago. Slow steps, quiet air between us. At one point, I stopped and asked, do you ever think about what might have been? He nodded, eyes glistening. Every day. The streetlights cast long shadows on the pavement, and for a moment, it felt like the world had folded back in time to a place where we were still young and hopeful. But time is cruel. It doesn't give back what it takes. When we reached the hotel gate, he paused. If I could go back, he said, I'd fight harder for you. And I, with tears in my eyes, whispered, and I'd wait longer if I knew you were coming. We stood there, two people bound by love, undone by time. The next morning, I found an envelope slipped under my door. It was from him. Inside, there was a short note written in his familiar, neat handwriting. I don't know if I deserve your forgiveness, but meeting you gave me something I thought I'd lost: courage. I never stopped loving you, even when I wasn't beside you. If you can, forgive the man who left not because he stopped loving you, but because he didn't know how to stay. There was also a small folded paper, a drawing I'd made for him years ago. It was of our little house, 2 rooms, a balcony, and a tree beside the window. He had kept it all this time. I pressed it to my chest and cried quietly, because love like that doesn't die. It just hides, waiting to be remembered. Before leaving the city, I asked him to visit one place with me, the small riverside park we used to walk to after dinner. He hesitated, then agreed. The park hadn't changed much. The same benches, the same slow breeze, the same children's laughter in the distance. We sat under the same tree where he once told me he loved me. I turned to him and said softly, "Do you ever wonder why life tests love so much?" He smiled sadly. Maybe because love is the only thing worth testing. We sat there in silence for a long time. I think both of us knew that this was goodbye, not out of bitterness, but out of peace. When the sky turned orange, he said, "You'll be okay now, won't you?" I nodded. I already am. That night, I left Hyderabad with a heart that was both heavy and light. I didn't have him beside me anymore, but I finally had something I'd longed for all those years: understanding. It was a winter afternoon when everything changed. The kind of day when the wind carries a chill that settles into your bones, and the world feels quieter than usual. I was sorting through old boxes when I came across an envelope. It was sealed, yellowed with time, and had my name written in his handwriting. My breath caught. For a moment, I couldn't move. I sat down on the floor, the box still open beside me, and stared at that envelope as if it might speak before I opened it. Then, with trembling hands, I tore it open. Inside was a letter, short, careful, written in blue ink. It said, "If you ever find this, I hope you've forgiven me. I didn't leave because I stopped loving you. I left because I wasn't strong enough to fight for us. There were things beyond me, things I couldn't explain. I thought I was protecting you, but maybe I was just running away. H." That was all. No details, no clear reason, just words that felt both heavy and empty at once. I cried until my chest hurt, because in those few lines I could feel both his love and his absence. He hadn't stopped caring, but he had stopped believing in us. Days turned into weeks after that. Something inside me shifted. I realized that I didn't want to spend the rest of my life wondering what those things beyond him were. I needed to know. So I decided to find him. It wasn't easy. The years had changed everything. People had moved, phone numbers had died, and his side of the family had stopped speaking to me long ago. But fate, it has its own strange ways. One morning, I got a call from an old friend of his, someone who had heard that I was asking around. She told me in a low voice that he was living in a small town 2 hours away. She said he worked as a caretaker at a local inn, quiet and alone. I didn't think. I just went. The drive there was long and silent. Every mile I passed, memories came rushing back. His laughter, his silence, his back as he walked away that last day. When I finally reached the inn, I saw him, standing by the garden, trimming plants, looking thinner, older, quieter. But it was him. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I wanted to run to him, to ask why, but my feet stayed still. He looked up, as if he felt me watching, and when his eyes met mine, time stopped. He didn't smile. He didn't look shocked either. He just froze and then slowly set his tools down. "Mary?" he whispered. My name sounded fragile on his lips. I nodded, tears already filling my eyes. He walked toward me, unsure at first, then stopped a few steps away. "You found me," he said softly. "I had to," I replied. "You left me with questions I couldn't live with." He looked down, his hands trembling slightly. I thought it was better this way." "Better? For who?" I said, my voice cracking. He closed his eyes for a long moment. Then, quietly, he said something I wasn't prepared to hear. "They told me to leave, Mary. Your parents, your brother, they said I wasn't good enough for you, that I was holding you back. I wanted to fight, I really did, but your father made me promise, made me believe that if I loved you, I'd let you go." I felt the world tilt beneath me. All those years of silence, all those nights wondering what I did wrong, and it wasn't me. It wasn't us. It was fear. His, theirs, everyone's. He continued, his voice shaking. "I didn't want to go, I swear, but I had no job, no savings, and your father said you'd be happier without me struggling beside you. I thought I was doing the right thing." Tears rolled down my face. "I should have told me," I whispered. "You should have trusted me, not them." "He knows," he said, "but I was weak. I was scared you'd choose them, not me." We stood there in silence. The wind rustled the trees, the sun setting behind the old inn, and for the first time in years, the truth hung between us. Fragile, painful, but finally real. We sat on the old wooden bench outside the inn. The sun had almost disappeared, leaving behind that golden blue light that feels both sad and peaceful. Neither of us spoke for a long time. The silence between us wasn't angry anymore. It was full of memories, full of everything that had been left unsaid. Finally, I asked, "Did you ever think of coming back?" He looked out toward the horizon before answering. "Every single day," he said. "But I thought you'd moved on. I thought you'd found someone who could give you the life I couldn't." I smiled faintly, though it hurt. "I didn't want a life without you," I whispered. "All I ever wanted was honesty, even if it was hard, even if it meant we had to struggle together." He looked at me then, eyes glassy, guilt swimming inside them. "I was young, Mary, and proud. I thought leaving was noble, that maybe it was love, to give you freedom." He laughed bitterly. "But love doesn't walk away, does it?" I shook my head gently. "No, love stays, even when everything else falls apart." He ran his hands over his face as though trying to wipe away the years. You deserved more than I could give. I didn't want you to look at me and feel trapped. I never felt trapped, I said quietly. I felt lost after you left. I waited, for years. I thought maybe one day you'd come back through that door and say it was all a mistake. His voice broke. I wanted to, but your father called me once. He told me you were doing fine, that you were better off. He made me promise to never disturb your peace. My peace? I said softly. He lied. There was no peace without you. He stared at me, and I could see it. The years of regret sitting heavy on his shoulders, the quiet suffering of a man who thought he was doing the right thing and ended up destroying what mattered most. I thought I was protecting you, he said. I was protecting myself from feeling unworthy. I reached out and took his hand. It felt the same, rough, familiar, warm, but it trembled slightly. We both made mistakes, I said. For you for leaving, and for me for never coming to find you sooner. I kept waiting for an apology when what I really needed was understanding. He squeezed my hand gently. Do you hate me? He asked, barely above a whisper. I shook my head. No, hate needs energy. What I had was emptiness. But sitting here now, I feel something else. Maybe peace, maybe sorrow, maybe both. He looked down, tears slipping quietly from his eyes. I never stopped loving you, Mary, not for a single day. I know, I said. I think that's what hurt the most. We sat there until the first stars appeared. The air grew cold, but neither of us wanted to move. For the first time in years, the silence didn't feel like distance. It felt like understanding. Finally, I spoke again. Did you ever think about what life might have been if you'd stayed? He nodded. Every night, I imagined us growing old together, fighting over silly things, making up by morning. I imagined your laughter filling the house again. Then why didn't you come back? I asked gently. He exhaled, voice barely steady. I thought I ruined it beyond repair. I thought you'd built a new life, and I didn't want to walk into it as a ghost. I smiled sadly. You were never a ghost, Henry. You were the silence in every heartbeat. We talked until the lamps outside the inn flickered on. He made tea, the way he used to. 2 spoons of sugar for me, 1 for him. We sat by the small fireplace, the light flickering over our faces. Do you think we can start over? He asked quietly. Not like before, maybe, but just start talking again. I looked at him for a long time. The years had taken many things from us. Time, youth, dreams, but there was still a small flame between us. Yes, I said finally. Not as if nothing happened, but as people who finally understand why it did. He smiled. The kind of smile that carries both relief and sadness. Thank you, he whispered. For what? For not hating me, and for finding me when I couldn't find myself. We didn't make promises that night. We didn't speak of forever. We just sat there, 2 people who had once been everything to each other, finally learning to forgive. Outside, the wind softened. Inside, The quiet between us was warm again. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe without the ache of what if. Sometimes closure doesn't come with big gestures or perfect timing. Sometimes it's just sitting across from the one who hurt you and realizing you both suffered in silence for the same reason: love that didn't know how to stay. He looked up and smiled when he saw me. "Still take your tea with too much sugar?" he teased softly. I smiled back. "Always." We ate together in silence, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was calm, like two people who finally understood that words were no longer needed for everything. When breakfast was done, I stood by the door with my bag in hand. It was time for me to go home. Not because I wanted to leave him again, but because I needed to return to the life that had kept me standing all these years. He walked me to my car. Neither of us knew what to say. There were no promises of forever, no dramatic goodbyes, just a quiet knowing that this chapter, though painful, had finally found its end. "I don't know what comes next," he said. "Neither do I replied. "But maybe that's okay." He nodded slowly. "Thank you, Mary, for hearing me out. And thank you," I said, "for finally answering." As I drove away, the road stretched endlessly ahead. For years, I had avoided this kind of silence. Now it felt comforting, like an old friend sitting beside me. I thought about everything we'd shared: the laughter, the heartbreak, the missing years. And I realized something simple yet powerful. Sometimes people don't leave because they stop loving you. Sometimes they leave because they don't know how to love you right. It took me years to understand that. He didn't walk away from me. He walked away from his own fear, his own reflection. And maybe that was the only way he could learn what love truly meant. When I reached home, I walked through the door and felt a stillness I hadn't felt in a long time. Not the stillness of loneliness, but of peace. I looked around at the little things that had once reminded me of him: the old mug, the framed photograph, the plant that somehow kept surviving. I didn't cry. I didn't wish for time to turn back. Instead, I whispered to the quiet air around me, "I forgive you." And for the first time, I meant it. In the weeks that followed, I began writing again. Little journal entries about memories, about forgiveness, about how love doesn't always end neatly. Sometimes it just changes shape. Sometimes it teaches us through pain what we never understood in comfort. One evening, I took out the letter he'd left me, the one that had started it all. I didn't read it again. I just held it for a moment, smiled, and tucked it into my journal. He looked up and smiled when he saw me. "Still take your tea with too much sugar?" he teased softly. I smiled back. "Always." We ate together in silence, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was calm, like two people who finally understood that words were no longer needed for everything. When breakfast was done, I stood by the door with my bag in hand. It was time for me to go home. Not because I wanted to leave him again, but because I needed to return to the life that had kept me standing all these years. He walked me to my car. Neither of us knew what to say. There were no promises of forever, no dramatic goodbyes, just a quiet knowing that this chapter, though painful, had finally found its end.
"I don't know what comes next," he said. "Neither do I replied. "But maybe that's okay." He nodded slowly. "Thank you, Mary, for hearing me out. And thank you," I said, "for finally answering." As I drove away, the road stretched endlessly ahead. For years, I had avoided this kind of silence. Now it felt comforting, like an old friend sitting beside me. I thought about everything we'd shared, the laughter, the heartbreak, the missing years. And I realized something simple yet powerful. Sometimes people don't leave because they stop loving you. Sometimes they leave because they don't know how to love you right. It took me years to understand that. He didn't walk away from me. He walked away from his own fear, his own reflection. And maybe that was the only way he could learn what love truly meant. When I reached home, I walked through the door and felt a stillness I hadn't felt in a long time. Not the stillness of loneliness, but of peace. I looked around at the little things that had once reminded me of him: the old mug, the framed photograph, the plant that somehow kept surviving. I didn't cry. I didn't wish for time to turn back. Instead, I whispered to the quiet air around me, "I forgive you." And for the first time, I meant it. In the weeks that followed, I began writing again. Little journal entries about memories, about forgiveness, about how love doesn't always end neatly. Sometimes it just changes shape. Sometimes it teaches us through pain what we never understood in comfort. One evening, I took out the letter he'd left me, the one that had started it all. I didn't read it again. I just held it for a moment, smiled, and tucked it into my journal.
Then I wrote my own letter beneath it. It said, "Dear H, I understand now. You didn't leave because you stopped loving me. You left because you thought love meant sacrifice. But love doesn't demand distance. It asks for courage. And though we lost our years to silence, I will always be grateful for the truth you finally shared. Be well wherever you are. M." Sometimes closure isn't found in the return. It's found in the acceptance that some love stories are meant to teach, not to last. And yet, when I think of him now, the boy who once made me laugh under the rain, the man who couldn't say goodbye properly, I don't feel anger anymore. I feel tenderness. Because even though his leaving broke me, his truth healed me. In the end, I learned that love is not about holding on tightly. It's about letting go gently when the time comes, with grace, with understanding, with peace. And that's what I did. Sometimes people leave not to hurt you, but because they believe you'll be safer without them. But the real strength is found not in their leaving, but in your ability to forgive and still wish them well.